Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's program from the Outdoor Art Club. It's a presentation of flood control, an ongoing concern for Southern Marin. I'm Robin Geisler, and I'm working with Diane Wagner to bring you today's program. For those of you who are not familiar with the Outdoor Art Club, we're a nonprofit women's organization founded in 1902. The club engages in civic, cultural, and charitable work in our community. To give you just a few examples of what we've done, the club organizes cleanup days along Marin's beaches. We prepare and serve meals at Jonathan's Place in San Rafael, and we provide a scholarship every year to a deserving Tam High student. The Outdoor Art Club also hosts a public speaker series so that you can see programs like the one that we're bringing you today. I have one housekeeping item to tell you about. Today's speakers plan to leave some time at the end of their presentation to answer your questions. We'd like you to use the Q&A function, which is probably at the bottom of your Zoom screen, to send in your questions. And they are looking forward to answering those. And now I'd like to introduce Susan Sweet, the program chair for today's event.
Oh, good morning. Thanks for everybody coming.
Welcome, Susan, and we look forward to hearing the program. Thanks so much for putting it together.
Okay, it's my pleasure to welcome our presenters today. Stephanie Moulton-Peters, Marin County Supervisor for District 3, and Judd Goodman, Senior Civil Engineer at the Marin County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. Stephanie has served as County Supervisor since 2020, representing Southern Marin with the exception of Homestead Valley, serving on numerous local and regional commissions, boards, and subcommittees addressing issues that include transportation, housing, the San Francisco Bay, sea level rise, and flooding. Stephanie's expertise in environmental policy is well utilized. Prior to her election as supervisor, we all knew her as the Mill Valley City Council member and three-time mayor. In the private sector, she worked at PG&E Management Environmental Regulatory Compliance for air, water, and toxic substances, and climate change programs. In the summer of 2022, she completed the Harvard Kennedy School Program for Senior Executives in local and state government. Stephanie and her husband live in Mill Valley and have 2 adult sons. Judd has over 18 years of consulting experience in infrastructure planning, design, and adaptive management, as well as practice leadership and project management. His most significant contributions are involving water resource problems, which require both an engineering and geomorphic perspective. As of 3 months ago, he assumed the position of Senior Civil Engineer at the County Flood and Control and Water Conservation District. He's excited to apply his knowledge and experience to serve the Marin community. We welcome you both and look forward to learning. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. Good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan and everyone. Shall I start my remarks? Okay, I guess this is us. So thank you to the Outdoor Art Club for hosting Judd and me today. It's great to be with you again. And I want you to know we appreciate all the good that the Outdoor Art Club and members do in Marin and Mill Valley in particular. So just by way of a short introduction, I'm going to just say that if you get up at the 35,000 foot height above Southern Marin Peninsula, what you'll see is a series of mountainous areas and valleys that cascade right into the bay. And there is a very small bench of land between the hills and the bay in Southern Marin. And that as a backdrop for today's talk is something to keep in mind, that we really have a dramatic landscape and we have a challenging one when it comes to flooding and drainage as well. So Judd is going to go through a number of slides showing you how we size up flood and drainage issues and what we're doing about them. And I'm going to add some local color along the way. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Judd now. He is relatively new to Marin County, but not new to these issues at all. And we're glad to have him on board. So Judd, all yours.
Thanks, Stephanie. So one thing to get started with, the title of today's presentation is Flood Control, an ongoing concern for Southern Marin. And I just wanted to emphasize that it's not only concerning, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to improve our community's quality of life. The agenda today, we're going to go through a basic introduction, talk about watersheds and what flooding is, flood zones, how Marin County is organized in terms of our flood control zones and projects that are underway. And then lastly, I will talk about climate change and sea level rise. So as was mentioned, I'm a senior civil engineer, started in December with the Flood Control District. Stephanie and I are going to be focusing on what's down on her Supervisor District 3 in Southern Marin. So this is really gauged towards this area, but some of the slides will apply throughout Marin County. So overall, what the Flood Control District's mission is, we're here to reduce flood risk to life and property, enhance the natural resources that we have, and also plan, design, construct, operate, maintain the district's flood control infrastructure. When I talk about flood control infrastructure, it's primarily the receiving channel. So be it our specific creeks or navigated waterways, and not as much of the upland storm drain system, which is important and we do master planning for. Typically that's maintained by our roads maintenance crew. So in addition to all of that, keeping up our infrastructure and improving it over time, we're also doing what we're doing today, working with citizen groups and other county teams, municipalities, and agencies in collaboration in order to make this mission come to fruition. So next thing I'm going to talk a bit about watersheds. In Southern Marin, there's a few watersheds that we have, and this has been organized into 6 specific watersheds. So when I'm done describing what a watershed is, Stephanie will chime in and talk about a little bit of the specifics of these different watersheds. Starting down, we have Marin City, Coyote Creek, Arroyo Corte Madera del Presidio, Ryan Creek, Sutton Manor, also Strawberry, and Bel Air, serving more of our Tiburon locations. And so one thing I wanted to just kind of give a little bit of a watershed 101 is what a watershed is, how it's defined. And so how it's typically defined is at a specific point in a creek system. If you look at that outlet point, the watershed is the area that drains to that one point in the creek system. So for instance, in Coyote Creek, you see the mouth of Coyote Creek entering into Richardson's Bay. If you look at that area, all of this area, when it rains, the runoff will drain off the landscape into the different tributary creeks down into the larger Coyote Creek to that one point. So that's how we define a watershed area. And so Stephanie, if you wanted to
Yeah, great. Thanks, Judd. So what I will say is this watershed approach was an exciting development in our county flood district work about 10 years ago. My predecessor, Supervisor Kate Sears, worked with the flood district to take this more holistic approach to how we look at drainage in our watersheds. And each of these, I'll say a little bit about them, starting down at the bottom with Marin City, in the kind of gray blue. That is known as the bowl, and that is a classic watershed drainage where the hillsides all drain into the center of the valley area, and that center you would know now as the Gateway Shopping Center largely, and the area behind it with the schools. But that drainage area comes from a number of creeks that come out of the steep hillsides in Marin City and culminates in what you see as a pond there by the shopping center. Previously, that was probably a wetland area that was reconfigured when Marin City was developed for ship worker housing in the 1940s. Going clockwise then to Coyote Creek, the mustard area, as Judd's described. What's interesting about Coyote Creek, it takes in Tennessee Valley and Tam Valley. And the Coyote Creek levee system, you'll hear more about today, but that's probably one of our most substantial flood mitigation project areas that was developed by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 40s and 50s in preparation for housing that went in the Birdland and Tam Valley area. So that's where our most significant flood management resources are. Continuing north into Mill Valley, Arroyo Corte Madera del Presidio watershed. This is where I live in West Blythedale Canyon at the headwaters of the creek, but it's joined by Old Mill Creek in Cascade Canyon and Warner Creek in Warner Canyon, as well as Reed Creek out of Homestead Valley to the south. And then even the kind of russet-colored Ryan Creek area and the Sutton Manor light blue to the top. These creeks all drain into the Arroyo del Presidio watershed and culminate in the creek that follows Miller Avenue down to the bay, Richardson Bay. And you'll see some historic flooding, and many of you have been here and lived through the flooding along Miller Avenue. And we'll talk a little bit about what the city is doing. And then finally, the light blue area, Sutton Manor, Alto, and Strawberry. Not a whole lot of watershed action. That's mostly hilly country, but then you move over into unincorporated Tiburon, going farther west. And you've got both West Creek and East Creek that drain into the north end of Richardson Bay, right around Strawberry Point School. So that's a little orientation for everyone as to where we are. Chad, back to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. And so this area, all these watersheds, in total, it's 14 square miles of watershed area that we're talking about today. So one thing, once we understand our watershed, we also, as a flood control district, need to understand rainfall patterns. So in this photo schematic that we have, you see storm direction. Mostly our storms are coming from the Pacific Ocean. On the west side of the mountain range of Mount Tam, tends to be more precipitation because of an orographic lifting effect where the clouds are gathering on that side of the mountain. And then there's a bit of a rain shadow on the Richardson Bay side, the eastern side. So I think it's annual precipitation somewhere in the 50 inches per year on the west side and 30 something on the east. So once we have a watershed and it rains on the watershed, we have runoff. And so runoff, if you look on, these are two artistic renderings of a natural watershed on the left and a more urbanized watershed on the right. And so if we're looking on the left, when it rains, water will collect on trees and plants, and it'll also soak into the ground. And basically what's left over after those have been saturated and soaked up, and there's still water remaining, is it'll run off into our creek systems. And so that term is runoff. So only a percentage of the rainfall actually makes it as runoff. In the urban system, we have more impervious surface. So we have rooftop, streets, sidewalks that don't seep water into the ground as readily. And so the percentage of rainfall, a higher percentage of that turns into runoff. So that can increase, you know, the amount, the total magnitude or volumes of runoff during a storm. It can increase the peak flow rate for that particular storm. And it can also reduce the time of concentration, so create flashier systems. So then corresponding to that, flooding. So flooding is it's a natural process. And it can be, becomes more of it's actually a good process when it comes to nature in many ways, to have floodplains flooding every now and then in order to allow for floodplain repairing processes to take place. I'm going to summarize a few different types of flooding. If we look in the far right, more in the uplands, this is showing creek overflow. So that's where if there's such a strong rain event that the creek shape and roughness cannot convey the water within its banks, it may overtop. So then a creek will overflow if there's enough of a flow rate associated with that rainstorm. Another form of ponding is isolated ponding. So that's where there's just not positive drainage. And in order to, the water may not readily flow to the creek because it's a natural depression, pools that are formed without drainage. Next is stormwater overflow. So that's where a storm drain might back up. And that's shown, you know, the third one to the right. So that can be caused by a few different things. One is a conveyance deficiency where, say, the storm drain pipe itself, even if it's fully clean, pristine pipe, just was not built and designed large enough in order to convey a particular flow that's occurring at that moment in time. So you can get backup if the pipe is a storm drain pipe or a channel is too small and cannot convey the water enough. But another means is a condition deficiency. So that's where you can get sediment, debris, vegetation buildup inside of a storm drain system. And that in itself can clog the pipe and cause backups. And then the fourth kind is tidal inundation. That's associated with rising tides on and flooding of lowlands coming from the ocean. And a lot of where there is development in southern Marin is actually along the waterfront. So tidal inundation is, you know, obviously something that's top on our mind with sea level rise, but not only sea level rise. Over time, there's a natural process for the bay mud to consolidate. So we have sinking of land in certain instances along with sea level rise. So tidal inundation is important to think about for the future. So as I mentioned, flooding in itself is not a problem, but you know, when we have people and we have property that we want to protect, that's where, you know, certain issues come to the surface. So as long as people have lived in southern Marin, we've been dealing with floods and their impacts. That's what this slide is supposed to show. As flood control engineers, we like to have a good timeline. So I'm not going to go through all of the different major flooding events and changes in land use throughout Southern Marin. But this is just to say that as engineers, we like to keep track. If there's a flooding event, a particular change in the landscape that has occurred, we like to keep track and learn from any flooding that has corresponded with that, to take those lessons learned for improvements in the future. And I talked a lot about runoff and storm water, but as a geomorphologist, I also think about sediment. So what I wanted to explain here is if we're looking at kind of a profile of a watershed, there's different zones of sediment. So there's, on the far left, we have our steep headwaters where there's more landslides. And this is where there's sediment production. So if there's a landslide or rill or gully erosion that feeds sediment into our stream systems, that is a natural process. And in the uplands, it's where it naturally occurs. Then in the middle, there's the zone of sediment transport. So that's where within our creeks, sediment is largely being conveyed through those systems, and conveying the water and the sediment down to the bay margins, which is where you'll see more of the depositional regime. So that's where on the flats along the bay, where sediment will the water will slow down and it'll and when the terrain flattens out, and it will deposit sediment. So that's actually an issue and for certain locations in terms of flood control as well, is sediment depositing and building up, and where sediment builds up, it may limit the conveyance capacity of that creek. So one question is how you can help. So as private citizens, one main thing is for property owners to inspect and clear your driveway culverts and drainage prior to a storm. This is important because while the roads maintenance crew is working within the road right away, there's what happens above, what drains to that road right away matters as well. So reducing debris that reaches the street is really helpful. Placing green waste in your compost rather than scattering it on the landscape or in a concentrated creek or waterway. So that's the main time that you can contribute is before the rainstorm happens, because once the rain starts, it's tough to clear that debris that may build up in the system. So next, I'm going to talk about the different flood zones and how the flood district is organized. On the left is an overall map of the county. And so this red circle, we're focusing down here in Southern Marin, flood zones 3 and 4. And so I showed here, overall, we have about, let's see, 13,000 parcels, 14 square miles of drainage area. And we also have pump stations as well and levee systems. So we're focusing on flood zones 3 and 4 today. And this is another map, a zoomed in map of flood zones 3 and 4. And so you can see quite a bit of the area is an unincorporated county, but there's also municipalities that are within the watershed as well. So how the county flood control district interacts with the cities is important. And Stephanie, did you want to speak to anything here? Oh, you're on mute, Stephanie.
No, nothing to add here. You got it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And so now that we've kind of got the lay of the land and you understand how the flood control district is organized in Southern Marin. I'm going to talk a little bit about projects. I categorized our projects into 3 different types. There's maintenance projects. So that's where we already have infrastructure and we need to maintain it to make sure it's in functioning condition. Capital improvements is where we're doing, we're building upon new project or previous projects as well as brand new projects to help alleviate flood need. Oftentimes these capital improvement projects require more dollars, more budget in order to implement. And then I'll also talk about planning studies and master plans. So that's really how the capital improvements, and before they become capital improvements, ideally you have a strong master plan that evaluates the entire watershed system in order to identify those improvements in a very consistent manner and technically rigorous. So this picture here, this is the Laurel Way desilting basin. And this is an example of where this project was first identified in a planning study as to, we acknowledge that there's a lot of debris and sediment coming down from this tributary creek before it goes into the storm drain system and through our urban neighborhoods. So they identified the need for the project, and the capital improvement was designing and building the basin itself in order to trap that sediment before it has a chance to clog our storm drains downstream. And every year, every other year, we're doing maintenance in order to clean out that sediment because it's designed to trap sediment. It needs to be cleaned so that the next year more sediment can arrive. And so this is what I consider in terms of where we are in the watershed, a headwater inlet, in that it's at the headwaters and it's at that natural transition point between the more natural creek system to our urban system. So now I'm going to talk about different maintenance projects. Here's a map of pump stations and creek and levee maintenance locations. So these are some of the names, and I'll talk about some of these in terms of projects that we have in the near future, including the Crest Marin pump station. So yeah, our maintenance is really focused around our pump stations. We need to not just design and build our pump stations, but make sure that they're ready for the storm season in order to convey flows and provide the flood control that they're designed to. So there's a number of mechanical parts that need to be maintained. And then also creek and levee maintenance, you know, as if we have a certain location that's sensitive, has been built by the Army Corps of Engineers, for instance, for Coyote Creek, and we need to make sure that it's not getting overgrown, increasing the roughness. When you have overgrowth, it's great for habitat. Sometimes it can be difficult in terms of flood conveyance. So if we're really relying on a particular channel for flood conveyance, we'll need to do things like clear out vegetation. And so for pump station maintenance, you have a photo here on the right where they're doing some maintenance in the wet wells for these pumps. So we have regular maintenance for all of our pump stations that occurs annually. And then major maintenance is on 6-year intervals. So coming up, we have maintenance scheduled for Crest Marin pump station and Seminary Drive pump station. And I believe that's to occur this coming summer. Next is creek and levee maintenance. So that's things like clearing vegetation, making sure that the levees are intact, that there's no excess erosion on the levees, making sure that the levees are mowed in the spring and that rodent burrows are filled twice in the summertime. Tide gates, make sure tide gates are maintained, though at least the ones that the district owns and operates. They're repaired and replaced as needed. And every other year, the Army Corps of Engineers completes an inspection of Coyote Creek and related facilities that were built associated with the project that they help fund. And then also sediment removal. This is scheduled, at least for this summer, in East and West Creeks and in Coyote Creek. This gives more of a zoomed in view, a map from bird's eye view of the Zone 3 project area of Coyote Creek and where the maintenance is typically occurs. Next, I'll move on to capital improvements. So for capital improvements within flood zone 3, we have Marin City Pond Pump Station. So that's planned for to be constructed in 2026, I believe. And so that's an important project to alleviate flooding in Marin City. There's also a planned dredge of that pond. There's the Crest Marin Pump Station Rehabilitation Project, which I'm going to talk about in more detail. Cardinal Levee Seepage Mitigation, Coyote Creek to Button Marsh Dredge Project, and then in Flood Zone 4, East and West Creek Restoration. So I also am going to highlight the ongoing Caltrans project. They're in the planning stages for the Manzanita Highway 101 improvements that are mostly focused on sea level rise. So that red dot represents where the Crest Marin Pump Station is. So you kind of have a geographic reference for the projects that I'm going to talk about. And then that location is on Coyote Creek, the Cardinal Levee seepage mitigation. So there's been a couple of presentations by Caltrans over the last couple of months on the Manzanita sea level rise project. It is a Caltrans project meant to enhance access along this transportation corridor to address recurring flooding and sea level rise along State Route 1, US 101, and the Manzanita Park and Ride lot. Caltrans is seeking funding for this project, and the draft environmental document, the target date is for 2027. So this is a very long range planning project. So this is one of the you may have seen or even attended some of the Caltrans meetings that occurred last week and in February. Next, I'm going to talk about Crest Marin Pump Station. This pump station was built in 1978, so it's at the end of its design life currently. It drains a low-lying neighborhood and the creek system. And it's scheduled for design and permitting in late 2024, construction in April of 2027, and the cost is close to $5 million. This is a zoom in of the outlet of the pump station, I believe. Next is the Cardinal Levee seepage mitigation project. This project is to replace 1,100 feet of levee on Coyote Creek. There's been is to address seepage issues due to rodents that naturally burrow in this area. And it's scheduled for design and permitting in late 2024 and construction in 2026. the cost is, the estimated construction cost is just over $3 million. And in terms of where we're located, the dotted line indicates the levee location. The flood control levee is larger than this. So if you're facing downstream, it's on the left bank. And just for reference, this is the shopping center. I think the Good Earth is in this shopping center to give you some landmark of where we're talking about. Next, I'm going to talk about some of our planning level studies and master plans. Ongoing right now is Marin City Stormwater Plan, which I am the project manager for. Manzanita area flood reduction study that was recently completed and has fed into what Caltrans is doing for the larger Manzanita project. And then the Tamalpais Valley interior drainage modeling. So this will be looking at within the Coyote Creek systems, the low-lying systems, the interior drainage. So looking at the storm drain system that feeds our 3 main pump stations for that area, and how we can improve the interior drainage, maybe upsize pipes or reroute things to improve or reduce flood risk and the duration and frequency of flooding that occurs in those low-lying areas. So basically trying to get water to our pump stations faster and in a more efficient manner. And then we're also working on a hydrology and hydraulics manual. That's an ongoing project. There is a hydrology standards that the county has had, but they're a bit out of date. And so this will be an update to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Marin City Stormwater Plan as an example of one of these planning level studies. So the Marin City Stormwater Plan we have this as a project in order to identify future projects to protect public access during flood events. As some of you know, Marin City only has one entrance and exit. And at the Drake and Donahue intersections and the Highway 101 off-ramp, there has been frequent flooding in the past, which has affected people being able to get in and out of Marin City. So we're identifying projects, we're recommending and prioritizing improvements, and that's to reduce flood risk. And when I say reduce flood risk, it doesn't mean that we're eliminating all flooding. It's that the flooding that does occur will occur in less magnitudes and less frequently. And also improving effectiveness of flood management operations and integrating with the Caltrans planning that's ongoing with the nearby Manzanita project. And so once we have a list of these projects, it's good to have a master plan so that we can attract funding and that we can, as the flood control district, can stand side by side as advocates for these projects with the community members. So that's a real emphasis. Within the different types of improvements that we're looking at, I kind of alluded to this previously, but you can have improvements in order to clear your clogs. So on the left, we want to maintain these pipes. This is a pipe, storm drain pipe in Marin City that's been clogged up with debris and sediment. So you can see it only really has about half of its cross-sectional area to be able to convey flow. So maintaining these pipes and cleaning them out is important for it to be able to function as intended. Repair cracks, so that's another condition deficiency, a structural deficiency that we want to improve is to seal these cracks, and in some cases we may need to replace certain segments of pipe if the pipe has fully collapsed, for example. And then another improvement is to actually increase the conveyance capacity, so be able to convey more flow by increasing the cross-sectional area of a pipe. So for this example, we're going from a 3.5 foot diameter concrete pipe to a 3.5 by 5 foot rectangular concrete box. So this is, if you looked at the storm drain pipe and cut it in half and looked at it on its end, that's the dimensions that we're looking at. So that's just to move more water downstream and reduce flooding. But then also on the bottom, there are landslides. This is an example of where there's erosion occurring that ends up clogging our pipes. So we want to be able to stabilize these sites so that the sediment does not get into our storm drain pipe system. So actually this landslide is contributing sediment, and you can see there's a V ditch that drains from left to right, and eventually it gets down into the storm drain. So the sediment that's clogging this storm drain on the upper left is being contributed by the landslide further up gradient in the watershed. So one thing that we're doing is a bit of modeling within Marin City. And this is a side-by-side view. This is from an aerial view, bird's eye view, if you will. And what this shows is after we after we have a calibrated simulation model of the hydrology and the hydraulics. So I talked about the watershed, and I talked about rainfall patterns, and I talked about flooding. This is in the left is an existing condition flood map. So you can see where there's bolder colors. The purple color means that there's over 1 foot of flood inundation depth. And so you can see this is the intersection with Drake and Donahue. And so that location is flooded during this particular design storm. And so we've been able to have a decent calibration of our model to actual real observations. And to the right, we have a proposed condition where if we're adding a pump station and a flood wall, we're able to reduce the extent of that flooding for that particular storm event. So this is a, yes.
Please finish your thought. If I might interject too, you know, the flood and drainage study master plan that we're doing right now in Marin City is very much like the one that Mill Valley undertook about 5 to 7 years ago. And the significance is that we actually, in both cases, went up into the watershed to see what can be done farther upstream to mitigate flooding. And while Judd is showing you the very significant improvements that we hope to work with the community to make, we are looking for opportunities to reduce the water that comes out of the hillsides farther up the hillside too. So it is the holistic approach that we started with, and but these are the projects that we believe will have the biggest bang for the buck to make the access in and out of Marin City more possible, more days and longer compared to what they have right now. Thanks for letting me interrupt, Judd.
Sure. So you'll see in the upper right, this map says proposed baseline. So that includes a proposed pump station, which we are taking as that project is in process. And so we are going through with the design and the permitting for that pond pump station. So that's our baseline. We're assuming that's going to go in, but then there's also some other locations where there is modeled flooding. So we have additional projects on top of that we're looking at for improvements in order to improve drainage and reduce flooding in Marin City. And so that baseline, the pond pump station, this is an artistic rendering of it from the parking lot of the shopping center. I think this would be the Target building right here. And so this structure in the distance is a pump station. So that currently it's controlled by gravity. The tide level in the bay is very much connected to the water level in the pond. And also if it's a higher water level, high tide, that water backs up into our storm drain system as well. So this project would allow us to, in some ways, isolate the bay from the drainage system and allow us to pump, when it does rain, to pump storm water out and have, and even pump the water, some of the water that's in the pond. When we have a forecasted storm coming, we can pump it in anticipation for more runoff to come. So in addition to those technical solutions, a big part of the Marin City stormwater plan is community communication. So as I mentioned before, at the end of this process, we're going to have a list of projects and we're prioritizing those projects. And we're trying to go along the process step by step with the community so they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, so that when we go after funding, the community is on board and as a stakeholder and as an important partner in seeking those funds to improve flood control. Next, I'm going to talk a bit about climate change and sea level rise. So the effects of climate change are threefold. And when we talk, there's many effects, but when it comes to flood control and flooding, one is the potential for increased rainfall intensity. So that may be stronger atmospheric rivers that really drive flooding in Marin County. Also sea level rise, you know, as the glaciers melt, we know that one possibility is that the sea level will rise, or there's debate as to the rate that the sea will rise, but we need to plan ahead for that. And then also wildfire wildfire potential is a big effect. And that comes into the respect of not only when there's fire, that in itself is a hazard, but in terms of flooding, after the next wet season, after that fire occurs, you have less vegetation that's holding the ground in place and a lot more erosion. And that erosion can clog our storm drain conveyance systems and cause more flooding. And so the next question is, what is the county doing about it at this point? What does sea level rise planning look like at this moment in time? The county has completed a Marin shoreline vulnerability assessment, which has at least some guidelines for what to look at in terms of projects. As part of that, you can see on the right, there is a flood map showing areas that would be flooded by different levels of rise. So in this case, 3-foot rise in sea level, what the inundation would look like. So there's some visualization tools that have been created for that. And we've recently hired a consulting group to develop a governance structure. So if this will allow a means to kind of govern how to implement sea level rise projects. So that's just getting started now. And sea level rise is considered in our current flood studies and our designs along the waterfront, but it's not yet driving new infrastructure. So we are looking at scenarios where, you know, if the sea level rose a range in the near term and longer term projections. But in terms of current state, we have our capital improvements that we're you know, planning, designing, implementing, building, but these aren't as focused on sea level rise protection as they are just on the current flooding needs. And then also TAM, the Transportation Authority of Marin, has its own sea level rise study ongoing. So that's looking more at the transportation infrastructure within Marin. So that's a study that can help with our collaboration, our multiple agency collaboration to help deal with sea level rise in the future. So with that, I wanted to thank everyone for your attention. The Flood Control District does have a website, which is shown here on the bottom. And I'd like to open it up to question and answer.
And thank you so much, Judd and Stephanie. We really appreciate your time, a really thorough, organized presentation. So I know we all learned from it. So we are going to start with questions. So if you have not had a chance to type in your question, please go to the Q&A and type it in and we will proceed. So one question that I saw that came in, with so many agencies overseeing the flood control that you've mentioned, who should we call if there is an issue during a storm? City of Mill Valley, county, Caltrans, etc.
Yeah, well, if you know if it's a highway issue, you know, a Caltrans owned and operated highway, the best entity would be to contact Caltrans. We have, I believe, a hotline on the website where that gives you information to an email. You can leave a message there in order if you notice something related to flooding. So
I have the website. It's marinflooddistrict.org. So if you go to marinflooddistrict.org, you can find a box to punch in a question. But if you know what jurisdiction you're in, if you're in unincorporated Southern Marin, call the county. If you're in the city of Mill Valley, contact the city. And we talk to each other. So
yeah.
if you contact the wrong person, we'll get you to the right place.
Okie dokie. One slide showed, if you showed in a picture that what the areas would be affected with a 3-foot rise in sea level. What span of time is that, Judd? When would we see that?
Right, that's a good question. And there's quite a bit of uncertainty as to when that may occur. In our Marin shoreline vulnerability assessment, I think we had a more near intermediate term of sea level rise in that 3-foot range, and then a longer term of 6 feet. And then more recently, the state has come out with guidance that seems to be lower than our original numbers. But what I've been told by those who put together the vulnerability assessment is that there's a bit of uncertainty as to when these levels of sea level rise will occur, but that, you know, they are to occur. So I believe that, you know, the 3-foot range, I'll have to look at and check in on this, but I think that's more of like a looking out like 50 to 100 years type thing.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And you also had a slide that you discussed about the Manzanita plan, and it was going to be done in 2027. Is there any interim plan? Because you can't park there when you're trying to get on the airport, or I mean, seems like it's often closed.
We're in discussions with both Caltrans and our state senator, Susan,
Great.
for relief on that. One of the things in the short term is if there's just greater attention by Caltrans maintenance on opening and closing that site and getting the word out as to when it's closed, and then opening it as quickly as possible. So that's our first action item to work on. But we know, and Caltrans has told us that the interim solution is just to raise the roadway through the underpass through Manzanita out to Shoreline. And so it's a matter of securing funding. And I'm in discussions with the state senator. It's not a good time to look for money in California right now, but I'm on his list and we're looking at perhaps climate change bonds and climate change funds as a source. So it's a slog, but we know it's very important, has been for years. So we'll keep on it.
Okay. Let's see, I'm reading my questions here. So we only have two major arteries to get in and out of Mill Valley, which is Miller and Blythedale. So Miller is greatly affected by the Tam Valley flooding. And then Blythedale, when you have the Richardson Bay running all the way up to behind the community center, is there like a schedule on a pronged way you're going to attack so that we can make sure we don't get stuck and not have no way out of Mill Valley if there's flooding?
Well, I see that Mill Valley's Director of Public Works, Andrew Poster, is online, and so he would have more detail. But what I can tell you from the time I spent on the council is that there's a lot of work that the city of Mill Valley has done on evacuation planning with the fire department and public works. And so they would be communicating with neighborhoods and directing people the proper routes. You've seen that we've opened up Hamilton Drive sometimes when that's needed to move people out of town. But I know the city and I are very cognizant that you have just the two ways in and out. Many areas in Marin have one way in and out. And I just want to say that this, because of our terrain with our valleys and hillsides, this is very common to have just one or two ways in and out, either to a valley or a peninsula like Tiburon. So it's a common issue, and getting, the planning for evacuation notifications is really our first line of defense, I think.
Okay, and I appreciate that, and hopefully sorry, I've got 9 more questions, and here we go.
Yeah, I see you've had some.
There we go. Richard says, thanks for the vital information. Will the new Coyote Creek levee be any different than the one it replaces?
Yeah, let me go to that slide. So it's gonna be in the form of so what we have here, the main difference is that we're trying to cut off seepage issues with I believe a sheet pile. So it'll look similar at the surface, but those sheet piles will go lower down in order to cut off pathways for seepage between the neighborhood side and the creek side. So it may look fairly similar at the surface, but the main improvements will be underneath the ground.
Okay, and Andrew wants to say thank you for a thorough and your time on the presentation. Jeff ask, are there any new tide gates being considered along Richardson Bay, particularly near East Blythedale and Alto Sutton?
So that was helpful for me to hear that question because I haven't heard that issue before, and perhaps Judd has, but I know tide gate and tide gate operation are an issue up and down our bay corridor. Judd, any additional information on your part on the Blythedale tide gates?
No, I'm not as aware
Yes.
on all the flooding issues at Blythedale, but I'm happy to look into them and
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll take that one back. Thank you for that.
Okay, the flooding map for Zone 4 does not indicate the flooding that the Marin shoreline vulnerability assessment indicated. Can you explain?
No, it was not an intentional ignoring. I can tell you that. I can't. Thank you, Carolyn. We'll go back and look at that too. We will. I wanted to say we have a flood zone 4 meeting coming up in Carolyn's part of town in Tiburon, and I'm going to look for that date. But we can look more closely at that meeting. Shoot.
Okie dokie.
Yeah.
Any thoughts towards making culverts bottomless and large enough to allow for wildlife corridors? Also, there's a challenge with removing headwater vegetation for fire mitigation and keeping vegetation to slow the flow for flood mitigation. Comments?
Sure. So I know in terms of the improvements we're making, where we have a good list in our capital improvement program of the most essential projects that will reduce flood risk in our communities. So where there is opportunity to enlarge culverts, we're mainly focused on flood control. So making sure that our neighborhoods the flood risk is reduced for our neighborhoods and whatnot. But yeah, where we have, I know I am managing projects, at least one in particular. It's in China Camp where we're looking more at not only what would be the minimum size of culvert that would be needed in order to convey flow, but also allow for tidal flushing for natural processes for the inland wetlands. And so, yeah, that's definitely under consideration wherever we're looking to upsize a culvert, a road culvert. We'll look at the potential for that as well.
I know we're running out of time and I want to try to get to a couple of more. You were, Judd and Stephanie were sweet enough to say they would stay a few more minutes, especially since I missed part of the questions. So another question from Potter. Measure F, San Anselmo withdrew FZ8 from the district. Going forward, how can the district function if a portion does not participate?
Potter, that's a very current question. And I can tell you that in flood zone 3, we are working with the city of Mill Valley right now to revisit some of the way that the flood revenues are distributed among all the watersheds. So I think that's the answer that I would give, is that staying in conversation with the communities that are part of the flood district and being responsive to their concerns and the projects and issues that are important to them, I think is a way to avoid some of this. I will say flood zone 8 Ross Valley is probably the most complicated flood district in the county, in that you have several cities and unincorporated areas, which all need to say yes to every flood project. And that, as you can imagine, is very difficult to build that kind of consensus, especially when projects take years to deliver. So there's some work to reset a plan for that area that everyone can buy into and see if we can keep the momentum going there. Not an easy thing to do, not an easy thing to balance all the interests in Southern Marin either. But I know everybody's committed to work on it together.
Okay, another question from Jeff. Are there, nope, I'm so sorry. I missed it.
Here.
Okay, any issues with habitat protection and endangered species presenting challenges to the efforts of regarding flood control?
Right, so many cases, you know, we in Marin, we enjoy the natural resources, right, associated with our waterways. In terms of environmental permitting, we need to go through the steps in order to have a project that you know, addresses all the impacts associated with an improvement to infrastructure and how that could impact our natural environment. So yeah, what we're finding is that more and more resources are being put towards that environmental permitting step, and it's not something that's common only in Marin County, but throughout the Bay Area and throughout California. Is that you know, there's in order to protect our environment and have a you know, better flood control, and any different type of project that's in and near our creek systems and the bay, you know, it takes more time and effort in order to account for those impacts and mitigate for those impacts. So yes, it can extend project timelines primarily.
Okay, and I'm going to blend two of Carolyn's questions. She's referring to the report indicates Zone 4 is already experiencing the negative effects, i.e. flooding in Zone 4. The current flooding, which is due to tidal inflow that keeps increasing on Greenwood Cove Drive, seems indicated. But why wasn't that discussed today?
You know, quite honestly, we put the emphasis on the west side of the highway, and I apologize for that. Yeah, Carolyn, we need to put more focus on your side as well.
Okie dokie. Are there any other questions? I know there were, but somehow I'm not getting them on my Q&A.
I know that Jill Templeton mentioned a pump station on Seminary Drive, which I
Yes.
was actually not aware of. So Jill, thanks for flagging that. We'll add that to our roster of information in Southern Marin. I'm glad to hear that it's doing the job and that there isn't so much flooding as there was prior to that station being put in.
I think that, Judge, you might have answered this earlier, but another question was, is there an assumption of the actual rising sea in the next 10 to 20, 30 years been announced or acknowledged?
Yeah, I think there's constantly new research and literature coming out in terms of what the forecasts are, the rate of you know, reduction in the ice sheets on above land in Greenland and all of that. So it's an ongoing science, right?
Let me
Yeah.
let me suggest, Susan, that you invite Judd and me and some other people working on sea level rise back next year. We'll have
Okay.
had a full year of studying sea level rise and how to get better organized for it in this county. And I think we'll have a little more information for you at that time.
That's fantastic. Well, I certainly appreciate all the time and effort you put into this presentation. And yes, it'd be great to have you come back with more information under your belt next year. And I appreciate everybody that participated. I hope you felt it was as good as I did. And so thank you again. And just want to invite everybody to please put on your calendar May 2nd. We're going to have a discussion on the mandated housing in Marin, and Urban Carmel, our city mayor, along with Danielle Staud, who is the senior planner, will join Bruce Dorfman, a longtime resident and developer, to engage in a discussion on how to successfully address the knowns and unknowns of the mandated housing in Mill Valley. So thank you, everybody, for participating. I appreciate your time.